Russian troops strike Latvian journalists with FPV drone in Ukraine's Donetsk region. Top 3 countries leading U.S. arms purchases for Ukraine, and how Norway preparing for possible war with Russia. The latest news next. Russia struck the Latvian public broadcaster LSM group with an FPV drone in the Donetsk region while traveling to the positions of one of the Ukrainian units to film a report. Russian drone exploded near the car. Odita Kronberger and cameraman Aigaris Kovalevskis were traveling with Alexanders, a Latvian fighting for Ukraine as part of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Airborne Brigade. They planned to film the story of a volunteer from Latvia with the call sign NATO. Near a section of the road where cars are forced to slow down, a Russian FPV drone exploded next to the car. The debris damaged the rear of the car and shattered the windows, but no one was injured. The driver noticed the danger in time and accelerated. Broadcaster's response. LSM notes that journalists are aware of the risks of working on the front lines, but their presence allows them to document the reality of war and counter misinformation.
We highly appreciate the work and courage of our journalists because independent journalism in this situation serves as an important counterforce to false and misleading messages, giving the public the opportunity to base their understanding on facts, not manipulation.
About journalists on Frontline. Earlier, the Donetsk Regional Military Administration reported that Freedom TV journalist Olena Hubanova-Hramova and cameraman Yevhen Karmazin were killed in Kramatorsk as a result of a strike by a Russian Lancet drone, and another journalist was injured. Russia killed the French journalist and photographer Anthony Lelecan near Drushkivka with an FPV drone, and his colleague Grigory Ivanchenko was injured. The French prosecutor's office has launched an investigation into his death. The president's office responded to a Financial Times report claiming Ukraine could announce elections and a referendum on February 24th. Security situation remains key condition, a source in Ukraine president's office told RBC Ukraine. As long as there is no security, there will be no announcements about elections, a source briefly told a publication commenting on the Financial Times report. What Financial Times wrote about the elections and the referendum in Ukraine? Financial Times, citing Ukrainian and Western officials, as well as people familiar with the situation, wrote the President Volodymyr Zelensky may announce in February the holding of elections and the referendum on a peace agreement. According to the report, Kiev began planning presidential elections and the referendum on the peace agreement with Russia after pressure from the United States. According to publication sources, Zelensky allegedly intends to announce this on February 24th, on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. The article claims that the administration of US President Donald Trump demanded that Ukraine hold both votes by May 15th, threatening otherwise to deprive Ukraine of security guarantees. The EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, said she will put forward a list of concessions that Europe should demand from Russia as part of ending the war in Ukraine. The proposed conditions would address, among other issues, the return of deported Ukrainian children and limits on Russia's military, according to Reuters. Negotiations aimed at ending the war have so far largely involved representatives from Ukraine, the United States, and Russia, with European officials consulting intermittently. However, European leaders insist that a peace agreement cannot be reached without their involvement. Everybody around the table, including the Russians and the Americans, needs to understand that you need Europeans to agree, Kallas told a group of news agency reporters in Brussels. She stressed that the European bloc has its own conditions that must be met. And for that, we also have conditions, and we should put the conditions not on Ukrainians, who have already been pressured a lot, but on the Russians. Continuing, she announced that in the coming days she would present EU member states with a list of demands for Russia. When asked what might be included, she referenced all Ukrainian children abducted during the war, as well as restrictions on the Russian military. About defining contacts with Russia, recent reports indicate that last week French President Emmanuel Macron's chief foreign policy advisor Emmanuel Bon visited Moscow to meet with Russian officials. Some European officials have also proposed appointing an EU representative to engage directly with Russia. Kallas emphasized, however, that the bloc first needs to clarify its messaging to Moscow before considering such a step.
If we don't stand up for anything, there's no point for us to be around the table. It's important that we discuss what kind of concessions we need to see from the Russian side in order to have a sustainable peace.
Europe seeks seat at Ukraine talks. Earlier this week, President Macron urged several European colleagues to revive dialogue with Russia. He emphasized that the ongoing war, now in its exhausting final stage, has inflicted heavy losses on both sides, creating an imperative to consider how to end the conflict. Macron added that France has already re-established technical-level contact with Moscow, stressing the necessity of European engagement with Russia. About a week ago, Estonia and Latvia also called for resuming negotiations between Europe and Russia, underlining that European states must have a role in peace talks. US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker stated that Germany, the Netherlands and Norway are the three countries that have purchased the largest amounts of US weapons for Ukraine under the Pearl program. Whitaker made the remarks during an online briefing with journalists. US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker emphasized that Germany, the Netherlands and Norway are the most active buyers of US weapons for Ukraine under the Pearl initiative, through which NATO countries purchase American arms to supply the Ukrainian defense forces.
I want to highlight the progress we've made on the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, PURL, created under President Trump. PURL allows allies and partners to purchase U.S. weapons to sustain Ukraine's defense capability. I want to recognize the three PURL leaders: Germany, the Netherlands, and Norway.
Summing up, Whitaker noted that the Pearl program not only strengthens Ukraine's defense but also contributes to peace efforts by putting pressure on Moscow to sit at the negotiating table and engage in dialogue. US support and Pearl program. Last week, Whitaker stated that the US will continue supplying Ukraine with offensive weapons until a peace agreement is signed. As long as it takes to conclude a peace deal, we will keep selling our weapons to NATO allies, who in turn will deliver them mainly to Ukraine, he said. The Pearl initiative was launched by the United States and NATO in July 2025. The first deliveries under the program reached Ukraine in September, and by the end of December, President Volodymyr Zelensky reported that 24 countries had joined the initiative, with more expected to participate. According to recent reports, Japan will soon join Pearl, providing funding for non-lethal equipment, including radar systems and body armor. Additionally, a few weeks ago, Ukraine's NATO mission head Ilona Hetmanchuk stated that in 2026, Ukraine will require $15 billion in weapons deliveries under Pearl, including air defense systems, particularly Patriot and NASAMS. Norway does not rule out the scenario of a Russian invasion and seizure of part of its territory. This may be necessary for Moscow to protect its nuclear assets in the far north, according to the Commander-in-Chief of the Norwegian Armed Forces, General Erik Kristoffersen.
We don't exclude a land grab from Russia as part of their plan to protect their own nuclear capabilities, which is the only thing they have left that actually threatens the United States.
According to him, Russia does not have any expansionist goals regarding Norway in the same sense as it did in Ukraine or other former Soviet territories. The general emphasizes that a significant part of Russia's nuclear arsenal is concentrated on the Kola Peninsula near the Norwegian border. This includes nuclear submarines, land-based missile systems, and aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Kristoffersen says that these forces will be crucial in the event of a conflict between Russia and NATO in another region.
We don't take that off the table, because it's still an option for Russia to do that in order to make sure that their nuclear capabilities, their second strike capabilities, are protected. That's sort of the scenario in the high north that we plan for.
Europe preparing for war with Russia. Europe began preparing for a possible war with Russia from the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But this issue began to be taken more seriously after Moscow's large-scale drone provocations in the EU last year. Russia's invasion is considered most likely to begin in the Baltic states, but other countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and other NATO states, are not ruling out aggression. At the same time, Europe has begun to rely on its own defense forces distancing itself from the US despite the fact that Washington plays a key role in the bloc's collective defense system and is considered the most powerful ally within the alliance. The change in NATO's orientation stems from the policy of US President Donald Trump's administration, which has called on European states to increase their spending on collective defense and rely more on their own forces. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Support Ukraine, like and subscribe.